Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome, beautiful people that I love. I'm Nancy Addison, your host, and I always start off my show with a prayer, and so I ask you to join me in whichever fashion you would like. And I ask our divine creator to please allow your love for us to distinguish any fear that we may have. Enable us to become quiet and focused on your spirit of divine love. Help us to feel the waves of peace washing over us and clearing away any tenseness and anxiety. We discover how refreshing it feels to be calm and peaceful. Alone with your presence, we feel a great serenity. We know that we are eternally one with the divine, and with the divine with us, we shall fear nothing. We are claiming and declaring your promises and gratefully accept your gifts of strength, fortitude, flexibility, compassion, wisdom, insight, and perfect health. Please send an army of angels to protect us from any kind of evil and to bring all injustice to justice now. Bring peace into our souls that passes all worldly understanding and make us a light for others to see your strength. We ask this in the highest good of all concern for everyone listening now and in the future. Thank you. And so it is. Today, I am honored to have Keven Annett on our show today. He is one of the most courageous people I think I've ever been in contact with. And he gives me inspiration to be a better person all the time. He was educated at the University of British Columbia, bachelor's degree in anthropology, a master's degree in political science, and divinity. Ordained as a minister of the United Church of Canada in May 1990, he held positions in Manitoba and downtown Toronto. Hired as a minister of St. Andrew's United Church in Port Alberni in July 1992, he expanded his congregation from 10 members to nearly 100 by 1993. Keven was fired without cause, notice, or review by the United Church officials in January 1995 after exposing the murder of children at his church's Alberni Indian residential school and the church's theft of the Husa, I'm not sure I pronounced that right, I hope so, native lands. Keven convened a human rights tribunal into crimes of Canadian Indian residential schools in Vancouver in June 1998. And then he formed a permanent inquiry into these crimes, the Truth Commission into the Genocide in Canada in 2000. He wrote the first independent report on genocide in Canada, hidden from history, the Canadian Holocaust, in January 2001. He also released a documentary film called Unrepentant in February 2007, which documents the uncensored record and evidence of deliberate genocide by Canadian church and state in Indian residential schools in Canada. I could go on and on about Keven and his accomplishments, which are so numerous, pages and pages. He is incredibly brave, and I am so thrilled to have him joining us today to share his thoughts with us. Welcome to the show, Keven.
Hi, Nancy. It's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I have a dear friend who's since passed away, who grew up in Canada on Vancouver Island. And she used to tell me stories about her childhood and about the things that were happening there. Her name was Kata Shatton Forrest, but I don't know what "knee" means, but in the obituary it said Christine Shade. But she told me tales about how the children were used as target practice at night and how terrifying it was. And she also told me that when she passed on, her mom made her promise to get all the treaties together and try to get all the tribal lands back, of which she did. She was of the Quack Sister Liquido tribe, and I believe her cousins Russell Quack Sister and Jody Rayburn helped her, and I'm not sure if they ever really got their tribal lands back. I'm hopeful they did. She thought that they did, but I just remember how everything she told me, your information confirmed it for me, that it was just absolutely horrifying to hear. But I'm so thankful for you bringing this information to the forefront, because I believe that, you know, they try to hide their crimes, and they shouldn't be hidden. And so anyway, I'm thankful for all your work, and I know you've been working very hard these days to make a difference. And I would love for you to address what you feel is the most important thing to talk about now.
Thanks, Nancy. Well, you know, it's a continuum, these crimes. If they're never stopped, they just continue. And one of the best examples I use for that is when people were upset a few years ago when the COVID measures came in and shots were being forced on everyone. I said, well, if you're an Indian in Canada, that's been the law since 1874. If you refuse a shot or medical treatment, you go to jail under the Indian Act, which is still in place. And it's why the death rate is still as high as it ever was in the native world. And if you ignore what happens to one group, it'll blow back on you. And so we see that all over the world. It's really that, I remember I wrote a report in 2017 that went all over the world, like governments, UN, everybody saw it. It was entitled "The Continuity of Genocide in Canada." And we trace how, you know, the land theft, the mass murder, the wiping out of over 65,000 children in the so-called residential schools, all of that is part of what you're seeing play out today. And, you know, the same kind of three-headed octopus of big money, church and state that did these crimes, it's still doing it, you know, to all of us now. And so, you know, that's kind of, I always put in the work I'm doing now in the context of that. It's this continuation. But like all of us, it took many years for the scales to fall from my own eyes and see that, right? And the best examples, like you say, is the people you know, the eyewitness accounts. If people go to murderbydecree.com, you'll see all the hard evidence there. The evidence now that the Canadian government and churches have done their best to suppress. An example the other day was they announced that, well, they don't think there are any mass graves of children at all. When 5 years ago, they were acknowledging what we had been saying for 20 years, that there were mass graves all over Canada. But we've even excavated some of them. We found bones at the Brantford Mohawk Anglican School in Ontario. The bones turned out to be human. This was in the spring of 2011. We uncovered it. We got the Smithsonian Institute to confirm these were the bones of young children. Do you think any media anywhere in the world covered that? And yet 10 years later, now they're saying, well, no, there were no graves. I mean, you know, the reality is that it's a continuing whitewash. It's like watching the tide come in all the time. You continually wipe out the past, like George Orwell talked about in the book 1984. You keep rewriting the history so that you can continue to do the crime. So that's why we're always talking about the past, because it totally affects where we are now and what's going to happen in the future. Right now, as you can tell by the flag behind me, one of the things that this whole campaign morphed into was a recognition that the present system is not only proven to be genocidal, but it's criminal. It has no authority. So in 2015, in Canada, we had a convention to establish a framework for a republic once the Crown of England, the Pope, and others had been convicted of genocide, which we had done in a case in Europe in 2012. We need a different system altogether if we're really going to take on this criminal system. So as part of that, we've sponsored common law court movements all over the world. And every Saturday, I'm on a call with people in 12 countries where we talk about how to unite across borders, not only to protect ourselves, but to displace this whole system, of systemic genocide, really. And the most recent, help in that regard has been the death of Elizabeth Windsor and the coming to the so-called throne of England of Charles, who is personally implicated in the disappearance of children in Canada, including the case a lot of people know about involving my former friend William Coombs, who saw Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip take 10 children from the Kamloops Catholic School, October 1964. The children were never seen again. Now we have eyewitnesses coming forward that said, well, they were killed, most of them, but 2 of them were brought back to Carnarvon Castle in Wales, where they were ritually killed as part of something called the Ninth Circle, which is a satanic cult that operates within the high levels of church and state, and sponsored by the Vatican originally. But Charles was present at these ceremonies, and there's eyewitnesses now describing that. So it shows you how this crime is ongoing, and we need to be continually vigilant, lest it happens to all of us, right?
Yes, I agree. And my friend Kata told me that when she was a child, her uncle used to take her with them when the royals would come to visit, and they would go out to a secret place and do their ceremonies. And she was told never to come out or peek, but she was quite a curious person, and she would see some of it, and she said it was just horrifying. And if you listen to Jesse, I don't know if you've ever heard of Jesse Serboda, who was raised to be one of the Dark Mothers, or Gloria Vanderbilt. She talks about a lot of one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is how far back this type of thing goes. But I'm going to read started out, and in order to hide that, they created the Catholic religion in order to control people and to hide the fact that they were a bank. So what happened was the very first trust in the world, which was quite frightening. It was 1302. Pope Boniface issued an infamous papal bull, Unam Sanctum, that he claimed control over the whole planet, which made him king of the world. In celebration, he commissioned a gold-plated headdress in the shape of a pine cone with an elaborate crown. And it represents the people in the center of our brains and allows us to access the source. And the 13-foot pine cone in Vatican Square that symbolized this. And this was created by Pope Nicholas V, and he had the papal bull Romanus Pontifex. And this one was called Arturni Regis, which made slaves of everyone on the planet. And it based this trust on the baptism papers, which give ownership to the church, and the document is really sent to the Vatican and registered, saying that we are a property of this trust. And then the third was in 1537, Pope Paul III called the Convocation, also known as the Open Council of Trent. This trust claims all lost souls, including those all lost at sea. And the Venetian bankers were a part of creating this trust, and it's called the SUVKV Act of 1540, and it gave ecclesiastical authority to Henry VIII. The crown was responsible for the collection of the reaping of the lost souls. And the crown was lost due to the deliberate bankruptcy of the Bank of England in 1860 and granted to the Temple Bar, which became known as the Crown Bar, which is known today as the Bar Association. And it's been responsible for administering the reaping of lost souls in the damned, including the collection of baptismal certificates and birth certificates. And this SUV trust, created in 1540, declares the Act of 1666 that says, to the benefit of the person presumed lost or abandoned at sea can therefore be assumed dead after 7 years. And the presumption is necessary for the salvation of every human creature. And the word human means monster in the Black's Law Dictionary, to be subject to the Roman pontiff. So according to the trust, we are all owned by the Pope, and admiralty law is based on this third trust. Technically, when we are assigned Social Security numbers in the United States, you're an individual that's declared dead already. And so this is kind of a background. So this goes back centuries on how these so-called royals or church officials feel they have ownership over all our souls.
Well, here's the thing. The reality behind all that is they don't own anything. They operate in fiction. They don't relate to us as people. They can't. They only relate to us as part of their fiction. A corporation is from the Latin word corpus, which, like you say, means death, a dead body. So when they say they own us, they don't own us at all. It's like voodoo. You're affected by voodoo if you believe in it. And you're affected by this if your mind is in their corporate system, and you equate yourself, your living soul, with the corporate fiction, the capitalized names. Once you step out of it, their whole thing falls apart, because it's all based on a huge lie, which is that some individual can be the ruler of others, that God is somehow incarnated in their institution. It's absurd. Reason and compassion and common sense destroys all that. And our proof of that is whenever we get people to step out of their system, they have no authority over us at all. A few of us forced the truth of genocide into the light in Canada. We forced Pope Benedict to resign when we set up our common law court. And it also forced Queen Elizabeth and 4 cardinals into hiding. They all stepped down from their office effectively, because we weren't operating in their mindset, their corporate system. We addressed them as flesh and blood people. Jorge Bergoglio, the present so-called Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, Elizabeth Windsor, Charles Mountbatten Windsor. I mean, they're all people hiding behind this corporate lie. And as long as our minds are in their lie, they have power in their mind and in ours over us. But there's nothing over us. We're born sovereign, like the founding fathers said. That's why America and the philosophy behind the American Republic is so hated all over the world by these corporate tyrants, because it represents liberty from their lie, right?
Yes. And I love the fact that you started your own common law court there. We have one here in Texas, and I took myself out of the corporate system about 3 years ago, became an American national, which is under God and under God's law, which is the highest form of law, which is common law courts actually cannot be overruled by their maritime law. So law means land, air, and water. And a lot of their corporations is in maritime law, which is just contract law. It's not even sovereign law. So we have unalienable rights when we're born from God, but we need to claim those. And so I'm hoping that people listening to this show can understand that concept, that we have to claim that and remove ourselves from their system of corporation and contract law.
Well, and you claim it here first. That's where it begins. And then how you live.
I believe what you're doing in law courts is fantastic. we keep going in and out. That Juan, our wonderful engineer, can help fix this. So what do you see coming up, Keven, and we help you, and how can we be a part of helping everyone, as in, if we're Canadian, how can Canadians help uh,
Well, the immediate. Oh yeah, can you hear me? Okay, I'm assuming you're hearing me all right because I know you're breaking up. But Canadians are in the immediate situation of having a rampant takeover by China occur. Effectively, the country's own now, especially on the West Coast, where Trudeau, the Prime Minister, gave China unlimited right to not only buy up the whole economy, but station their troops on Canadian soil. And so, that's something affecting America as well, very deeply. Over a third of the American debt's owned by China. So we face an immediate threat there, and it makes the need for people uniting on a patriotic basis all the more important, overcoming these false divisions politically, and fighting for our sovereignty and our own traditions, right? That's kind of an immediate thing. We formed a thing called the Republic Alliance, which unites people, as I mentioned, in 12 countries. It's almost like in the world there's this battle now between what we call the corporatocracy, which we saw played out during the COVID thing. All the politicians all over the world, like puppets on a string, just doing exactly what Big Pharma says, because there's no such thing as government and accountability and democracy anymore. The system doesn't need that anymore. What they need is for people to be obedient slaves. And the best model for that, for a corporation, is embodied in China, which is the rising power in the world, politically and economically and militarily. And, they, like the Vatican, which is the main financial backer of China, they just underwrote them for over $1 trillion for all of their economic expansion. That's why Bergoglio in Rome called in all the money into the Vatican Bank to make sure that they're able to follow through in their economic support of the Chinese economic expansion, which this so-called Pope has pledged to do. So when with all that in mind, the struggle in the world between this corporatocracy and then, on the other hand, the people organizing themselves on a sovereign basis, detaching from the system, setting up their own common law assemblies and courts. And that's really the major work we do now. Not so much, there's no point protesting against the system that's going down. You create a new system. That's our whole focus, to create our own assemblies and courts. You do that in your own neighborhood, and then you branch out and connect internationally. It's a civil war, really, that's starting, that our children will be fighting, and our grandchildren. It's not going to end overnight. We have to start arming ourselves in every way to carry on this battle and to reclaim the world for everyone on a sovereign, common law basis, which is really the only answer to the system, because you try working through it, as we've done year after year, and it's a roadblock after roadblock. The system doesn't respond to you anymore because it's a machine. It's a dead machine with human puppets, and we have to pull the plug on that machine in every way possible. We've shown a way to do it. Like when we started occupying Catholic and Anglican and United churches in Canada, within a few weeks they started admitting to their crimes. Like in The Art of War, by Sun Tzu, they say, strike at what your enemy loves, and it doesn't matter how small you are, they have to respond. We started seizing these churches, threatening their money and their public image. They started talking. And the same thing can work on any issue. You've got to be determined to simply not let this system happen. Go beyond words and start taking back power, which is why we say, get on board with this whole Republic Alliance across borders and take back power in your community, right?
Yes. And I know back in 2008, I heard in one of your interviews that I think it was Stephen Harper in Parliament apologized, but he never admitted genocide. And then the way it's like guarding the hen house. right? So
Right.
it's kind of like in the U.S. The sheriff will be also the coroner and the undertaker, and and there's like no, he can do everything. He can, somebody can be killed, and he can take care of it all. Nobody knows
Right.
anything about it. It's like people just disappear, and
Well, that's
so
what happened.
I know in Canada the government made these deals with the indigenous, saying, we'll give you some money if you won't ever
Oh yeah.
research the
Well,
murders. And
well, that's exactly what was set up from the start. We held our first tribunal into these crimes in June 1998. By the new year, the government had brought in what they called an Aboriginal Healing Fund, which meant it was a bribe. It was hush money. It said if you suffered any of these things, you can get money, but you can't sue. You've got to sign off all legal action, and you got to indemnify the churches, which is what you say under law is you didn't do anything wrong. In return for money, I'm going to be gagged. And it's allowing the criminals to get away. And part of that is the apology farce, because under law, an apology doesn't mean I'm sorry. It means an apologetic in the English language means to defend what you did. Look it up in the dictionary. An apologetic is when you're defending something. So when you say I issue an apology, you notice they don't say I'm sorry. They say apology. That word says we didn't do anything wrong. We're indemnified. And that's why leaders who are caught,
so I think
in these
you're
I'm sorry, did you say I broke up? Can you hear me now?
checking my connection. Okay.
Can
I know Kevin's in Canada, so
okay.
I'm not sure exactly
Okay,
where
can you
he
hear
is.
Can you hear me now?
I think you went off when you were talking about apology. What the definition of
All right.
can
I'll
hear you.
carry on then. The word apology under the law does not mean I'm sorry. It means I'm justified in what I did. We didn't do anything wrong. Because an apologetic, if you look up in the dictionary, an apologetic means to defend an action or something. So it's a way for them to have double think. You think they're saying we're sorry. In fact, they're defending what they did, and they've indemnified themselves. There's no consequence. So that's what killers do when they commit a crime and they're still in power. They make it seem like they're sorry and nothing ever happens. The situation continues. And so that's why you got to be wary of all these words, because it in fact, it's the opposite of what you think it means, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so much of it is word trickery. They keep changing definitions of words, and so if you want to look things up, you have to literally go back to a dictionary where that law was made or that happened, and look up the terminology then, because they keep rewriting history to make it so that it looks like they're doing everything right, and it tells us what they want us to think, not the actual truth. They've rewritten the U.S. history books for schools in like 1922, and then again between 1950, like around 1953. And now they're even trying to rewrite the Texas history books. And is word like the word individual, or there's so many of them. Understand, if a judge says you understand, that means, are you going to stand under his authority?
Right. You broke up a lot there. I didn't hear that. But did you ask me a question, or?
I'm sorry. Our engineer is telling me to disconnect and try over again with Wi-Fi. So,
okay.
Kevin,
if you can hear me, I'll just respond while you're doing that, if that's all right.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Okay. The thing about everything we're talking about.
First time to do this type of thing.
The thing that you're talking about, the problem is it's also abstract. People use words, they don't know what they mean. The reality is how could a system based on the murder of children be in any way apologized for, even if the word was used in the proper way, which is, I'm sorry. Why would the people who did the crime be sorry about it, right? People are never sorry for the crime they do. When they're caught, they just want to get out of it. So they appear to be sorry. But the truth is, if they were sorry, they wouldn't have done it in the first place, because they're connected. The people who did these crimes are still alive. It wasn't just yesterday. And so that's the first thing you realize. They have to make the whole thing abstract and distant, because when it's up close and you think of children being thrown in the ground after being tortured and raped and murdered, what would you do if that happened to your children? Would you want an apology and a bit of money to shut you up? Of course not. You'd want the people who did it brought to justice, but the people who did it are in power. So how do you get that happening? You don't, unless you overthrow them. You know, that's the reality. That's why we realized in Canada, you needed a new system, a new republic, in order to really put them on trial and get justice. You can't get it through the old system that did the crime, right? So, I mean, that's something we all learn the hard way. But folks watching, I urge you, if you want to go learn more about this whole history, murderbydecree.com. All of our recent news is on that site under ITCCS updates. And you can find it all there. Also, the other site having to do with our republic is republicofkanata.org. I'm putting that on the box too. Kanata, Kanata, republicofkanata.org. Kanata is where the word Canada comes from. It's a Iroquois indigenous word. It means where people sit as one around the council fire. And it's really embodies the whole philosophy of our republic, and really common law republics everywhere, is that the people are equal. They're their own sovereign. You don't have one person over you. You don't have one power over you. People are equal. And that's the real meaning of sovereignty. Hi, welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry about it. I live out in the country in Texas, and I have an Ethernet that's usually very reliable, but I apologize right. for the. But I'm very excited that you are so courageous in bringing so much of this information to light. And I think, you know, everyone who cares about these children and these people around the world, I mean, it's you know, I know it's happening in Canada, it has happened in Canada, but I do believe these globalists have reached everyone in the world in some way, shape, or form, and have created terrible situations with the human trafficking and the pedophilia and the child abuse. And I think you are.
Well, you know, one of the things I always ask is how can they do it in the first place unless we let them? I mean, when you talk about there's not a lot of them. But for some reason, people feel the need to go along with their system and be part of it, right? And so I always say to people that instead of looking for the enemy in an abstract or public figure, yeah, they're part of a wrong, but so are we. We pay for it, we cooperate in, we buy their products, we keep the system going. So the real question is, if you want to change it, you got to ask, what's my complicity? And, you know, how can that change? Because that's something you have control over, right? Somebody's actions you can't really affect. I mean, I've been fortunate to be able to affect that, you know, way beyond what I thought it was possible to do. But that's just because I never gave up. And, you know, people will often use as an excuse why they're not going to do anything, as they are too powerful. They are going to hurt me, right? If we take action against them. Well, no, because in fact, whenever we do push them, they back off. You know, when we were occupying the churches and the police would show up, I would go over to the top cop and say, look, this church, take the Catholic Church, they have a standing policy that says if children are harmed and raped, you're not to tell the police or you get excommunicated. Now, I said to the police, if you do that, you're protecting them. And every time we said that to them, the police backed off. So my point here is that if you push the system, it gives. But if we're also afraid and we'll never confront them, you know, the few rule through our fear and our ignorance. We pull that away and they fall. It's that simple. It's like deflating a balloon. You pull out your energy of their system and they have no power. But, how many of us want to do that? We often can only do that when we have to. And I'm only doing this work because my life was destroyed. If I had had options, I wouldn't have, I had 2 children to support. I would have been thinking of them and I would have got another job. But at every point I was stopped. I had the kids taken from me. I was blacklisted. And it's almost like the hidden hand of the universe is saying, no, Keven, you got to keep doing this work, right?
I agree with you.
Yeah. So.
And when you confront someone who is a liar or doing something, and you just believe and stand your ground frequently, and I really believe that to be true, and we just have to stay strong and stay in faith and move forward with what we know is right. And none of us are perfect, but I think taking action and speaking your truth and being strong in your individual self is so important these days, regardless of where we are in the world and what we're up against.
Yeah, and it's a learning for all of us. I mean, this doesn't come overnight,
Yeah. Well, and you've been so strong and brave for a very long time. I just really admire your ethics and your moral standing and how you decided to do the right thing regardless of what they were attacking you with, which was considerable.
Right. Well,
I think a lot of people would crumble.
Right. So here's the thing. At the time, I didn't realize what I was up against, because if I had have known, I probably wouldn't have done what I did. Like, to some degree, our ignorance helps us because we're naive. We think, okay, if I do the right thing, they'll respond and things will be made better, right? But that isn't what happens. You have to keep getting hit for, like the best education is a black eye, as they say, right? We may have an idea of what we're up against, but only when we encounter it and fight with it do we really learn what we're up against. And so I had to go through that over many years, and it's hard to impart that experience to somebody who hasn't been through it. So I don't really try to teach that to people. I try to nudge them in a direction where I know it'll happen to them too, and that's how they're going to learn. So that's part of it.
All of this internet tech stuff is making this a little difficult, but your message is still strong and good. And so we have about 10 minutes left. I'd love for you to maybe give some advice for people on, how do you stay so strong and go forward and stay grounded and connected?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the good things about when bad things happen to us, we have to make a choice. It's like a fork in a road. And you only begin to discover your stronger self under those circumstances. Because, I think our real enemy is too much security and too much comfort. It tends to dull our better self. And when you have to go through adversity, it brings out that other part of you that can't be beaten. And, the classic example of this, I remember I knew a woman, Maggie. She was a Native woman, homeless Native woman on the street. And one night I saw, she was like the stereotypical down and out Native person. You think they wouldn't be able to do anything because she'd been horribly tortured from day one. And so one night, one of the Native people in our group was grabbed by the police and thrown in prison. People spontaneously gathered outside the Vancouver police station and demanded that they release Trevor. Well, I look over and there's Maggie. She's dragging a police barrier across Main Street and facing down 20 riot police all by herself. And, like she's saying, let Trevor out, because she was angry. And her anger overcame the fear of those cops and their clubs. And when we reach that point, we're unbeatable. And they know it because we're the majority, right? And sure enough, an hour later, they let out Trevor because we wouldn't budge. We sat down on the street. We didn't move. We blocked traffic. Okay, so those methods work, but I remember Maggie saying later in a community meeting, she said, what worse can they do to me that they've already done? They can't, so kill me. I don't care. Like, my life every day is hell. I don't care if they kill me. What do I have to lose? And I got to that point in my life too. They've taken everything. So go ahead, do your worst. And at that point, they know they can't beat you. All they can do is discredit and isolate you, which is what they do. There's this enormous smear campaign over the internet still about me and our work. They get people afraid, so they won't listen, because you can't listen to the veterans, because they've had an experience that they need to impart. And so you got to isolate people like me. And it works a lot of the time, but it's coming around now, because everything we've been saying is now being proven true. So that's kind of in a nutshell, but I mean, you got to learn it for yourself. The important thing is to do something and start engaging and never give up. Because if you do it for 5 minutes or 5 days, it never has any effect. You got to keep at it, lifelong struggle.
Yeah. I'm learning about all of this type of thing many years ago, and I had a friend whose mother was President Johnson's assistant, and then President Reagan in his cabinet. And he's been telling me since the 80s that there has been like a corporate government kind of behind the scenes that's really running things, that it's not what it seems. And I actually had a friend recently go to Washington, D.C. and purposely go and look around at the buildings. And she said it's absolutely empty, that there's nobody there. Yeah, right. And they have a barbed wire fence around the White House still. And people don't realize this, but I do think that all of us gaining our confidence in knowing what we are learning and knowing, and getting great information from people like you, who are an amazing researcher, this is empowering us to take those steps, to move forward. And in many ways, if we just look at it as if we're dealing with like pirates, I mean, I think of them as like mafia bankers and corporations. If we look at it as if we are dealing with corporations, and many of the people you're dealing with are just people doing their job who don't actually know what's going on above them, or why they're being told to do this or that. And just educate those people as you go. Many of them find out that they are probably on your side, on our side of freedom, sovereignty, and peace on earth.
That's right. And the reason they don't take action is they don't see an alternative. And that's why we're trying to build it. You got to create something for people to join. Otherwise, you're just banging it at a dead wall. So we say, look, there is no America anymore. We have to recreate America. It's that simple. I'm half American, so I kind of lived across on both sides of the border my whole life, and I see this. Canadians don't even imagine that they can govern themselves. Americans have that in their tradition, but they've got to recover it, because they think it's here when it isn't anymore. It's being wiped out, like you say, and so it's about recovering or reestablishing for the first time that self-governance. Like John Adams, the second U.S. president, founding father, said, America is the first nation in history, and perhaps the only one in history, that's founded on the idea that the people are sovereign. They don't have a sovereign over them. The people are sovereign. They govern themselves. They create government. They can remove government. The right to revolution is right in the Declaration of Independence, right? So we just act on it. And you got the majority. It doesn't have to be particularly violent. They'll all come over to us when we do that. There's that secret longing for that, even in the people in the system, right?
Right. Yes, I'm a member of the Republic of Texas. So it's I think people are creating these republics wherever they are living, and we have a common law court here. And I believe it's in our laws, our federal laws. I'm absolutely positive it's in our laws, and I'm trying to remember if it's 208 or what it is, but it literally says the Bible is law. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we can stay strong and live under the divine law of the divine creator, and not assume that anyone has any authority over us. And why would they have any authority over us anyway?
Right.
So we just have to claim that and live it.
Yeah, and someone putting a gun to your head and saying, you agree with this, don't you? that's not consent. That's coercion.
Coercion. Yeah.
And so under law, all contracts are nullified if you're being coerced or if you're being kept in the dark. So we can walk right out of the system because it's all based on coercion, and that's the point. So that's kind of the focus of where all of this campaign is led. So it's something we urge people to do. We've got manuals of how to do that. I go around all over North America and Europe doing these workshops, training people in the common law and in assemblies and linking up with the Republic Alliance. So I put my contact info there on the board and our websites. But let's keep it going, people.
Okay. Well, why don't you just, even though it's on the board, tell people how to get a hold of you, how they can come hear you speak. And that would be great because some of these are going to be podcasts.
Okay. You can invite me to come and speak. I'll come to your community. My email is angelfire101@protonmail.com. Website's murderbydecree.com. You can see all my books there. I've written 20 books. Under ITCCS updates at murderbydecree.com, you'll see our recent news. And we do a blog show every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern at bbsradio.com/whowestand. And it's archived. We've been going 7 years. It's the voice of the Republic and the resistance. And it's one of our voices on the world. So that's another good resource. So that's the way. And like I say, write and we'll hook up.
I'm so honored for having you join us today, Keven. I can't thank you enough. And I want to tell you how sorry I am. We had technical problems, and I hope you'll join me again when we work out a few of these technical kinks.
Absolutely, Nancy. Just let me know. It's good.
Thank you. I mean, all the books you've written, I've written only 7. I can't even imagine the research and the work that goes into those. And that's just so admirable and inspirational. And it's people like you that really, when I wake up in the morning, give me inspiration to keep doing what I'm doing and in my small way of doing my show and writing my books and things like that. And the censorship these days is so horrific. I've been shut down off of so many platforms, and so we just keep coming back, right? Just finding another way to do it. So I will be honored when you come back, and I wish you all the best in all of your endeavors. And you have my support, and just let me know anything I can do to help.
I sure will. Nancy. Maybe we can have some meetings in Texas. I love the flatlands because I was raised in the prairies in Manitoba, and it's very much like the Midwest of America, the people, the culture, and everything. So anytime I can go to the Midwest, it's fine with me. Right?
Well, I have so many Canadian friends. I'm not sure why, but I bond real well with Canadians and indigenous. So anyway, we've come to the end of our show, and I just want to thank all the listeners and viewers for joining us. We know your time is valuable, and Keven and I are very appreciative. And I'm Nancy Addison, your host, and I do believe that how we do anything is how we do everything. So as you go through your life and you connect with everyone around you, just remember to add that main ingredient, and that main ingredient is always love.